All right, everybody, let's go ahead and dive into the pen testing report now for the editorial at HackTheBox. So hopefully we've taken some good notes either on Obsidian or Notion or whatever your favorite note-taking app is. Doesn't really matter as long as you're comfortable taking notes with it. We're going to take those notes and now apply it to a pen testing report tool. In this case, what I like using and what I used for the CBBH exam and what HackTheBox recommends is Sysreptor. They have a template there for the CBBH that I'm using in this exercise. Obviously, I'm tweaking it a little bit so I can use it specifically for the editorial, but essentially it's just the same information. So you go here onto the website, you create an account, and then you just start with it. So let's go ahead and jump into it now. So this is the blank template that I have ready. We're gonna go through it. This is what it's gonna look like when you first start off with it. First things first, you're gonna see here the settings, notes, and the reporting. So go ahead and fill out the settings. If you want to add any notes, I usually don't. You can fill that out. And then the nitty gritty stuff is going to be in the reporting part. The other thing I want to stress is understanding that there's a little status menu bar here that really did help me out with writing reports. So what I like doing is when I take my notes from Notion or Obsidian and I do a first draft on the reporting template, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as in progress until I finish that section, and then I put it as ready for review. In other words, when it's ready for review, that's the next step where we're going to go in and verify if everything that's written in the review is accurate or not. And if we verified everything and it needs improvement, we can do an improvement and we can go in at another time and do that. Or if we finish those improvements and we know everything works in terms of the commands and the flow and the structure and everything else, then we can go ahead and check it as finished and leave and move on from there. And now let's go into each of these sections and then what you need to do for each of these categories or fields. So starting off with the meta, you're going to go ahead and enter in your candidate name, title, and email address. And then here's the report title. In this case, we'll do editorial HackTheBox. And then you can enter in the customer information, you can enter in the customer abbreviation, and then the pen tester approach here, you can pick black box, gray box, white box, so forth and so on. And from there, you could do a start date, a pen test end date, and a report date. And then you have a certain level of report versioning here. And then once you're done with, let's say, the report versioning, you can remove the to-do. The to-do that is there to indicate, obviously, it's a nice little pop out to say, hey, you should enter in this information. But the other benefit of that is when you do go into publishing this report into a PDF format, there's going to be a little screen that says there's like 8 to-dos that you missed or something like that. Okay, so go ahead and clear that, clear the to-dos, and then enter in the information and go from there. So next up, let's go ahead and go into the document control. This is where you have the customer contacts. So you enter in the customer name, their title, their email addresses, and if you need to add more, you can add more, or if you need to delete them, you can delete them, so forth and so on. Next section is the executive summary. This is the executive summary. It looks like there's a lot of information, but this is actually a boilerplate from HackTheBox. So there's nothing you have to go in and change. This is a boilerplate that they've added in, and it just covers pretty much the scope that you're allowed to have and then the scope that you're not allowed to have. So I do recommend going into it and reading exactly what it all says and have a good understanding of that. That is super important. So scrolling down now into the scope. The scope of this assessment was as follows. Here's a to-do. So let's go ahead and do that to-do. And it shows here an IP address. In this case, I'm going to write editorial.HackTheBox, right? And then I have the star here for unlimited amount of subdomains. I don't know what they are. I'm just going to leave it as a star. I'm going to remove the to-do, and that's going to be finished. And then here we have in scope assessments or in scope assets. And then we'll go in, enter in the URL, enter in the IP address, mention what the site is. Is it authenticated? Are you not authenticated? So forth and so on. You can make a copy of this and enter in as many as you want. Now, some of you may have been noticing now that there is two sections of these, and one is in Markdown that is editable, meaning you can go in and make changes to it. The other is how the output of that Markdown looks. So if you go here in the side-by-side view, you could see side-by-side, or you could see just the output itself, or you can go into the Markdown version of that. So I'm going to be flipping through these a few times because it's going to be a lot easier to show it in this tutorial. But most of the time, if I'm doing a retired machine, I'm going to do it as a side-by-side so that I can see how it looks like while I'm making those edits. Okay, so let's continue down. And then here, assessment, overview, and recommendations. This is going to be the summary and findings and recommendations all here throughout the whole pen testing report. I like leaving this at the end because I want to know exactly what are the most important ones that I need to reference, but I'm essentially going to compile it all down and throw it in here. So leave that to do there, and then let's continue on. Web application security assessment summary. All right, so began all testing activities. Again, this is boilerplate. This is from HackTheBox's template. I leave this alone. I don't change it. Next is the appendix. This is for the CBBH or CPTS. This is how it's going to look like for you entering your flags, the flag values, so forth and so on. This is a template that you can, in this case, it's not really relevant for the editorial, so I can just go ahead and delete it or just leave it alone. I'm going to delete it. I don't care about it right now. All right, moving into the findings. So I have here a to-do finding title. I've already added a finding, but in this case, when you first start off and you've signed up for it, you've picked your template, you're not going to have a finding. So you could add findings by either Control J or just hitting the plus sign. So adding a finding. This is probably the most important part of the report. The findings are the nitty-gritty details that everybody will be looking at to see exactly what's going on with each vulnerability. So starting with the title of each finding should be concise yet descriptive. It should give us a clear idea of the vulnerability without really requiring further context. So as an example, it could be server-side request forgery, SSRF via file upload. Next up is the CWE, the common weakness enumeration. It is a unique identifier for common software security weaknesses. It essentially helps standardize the description of vulnerabilities across different systems and tools. And this pretty much just makes it easier for developers and stakeholders to reference additional information about the vulnerability, its typical causes, or potential mitigation strategies. What I usually like doing for this is I'll take the title and I'll throw it into ChatGPT and say, based on this title, what would you recommend in a pen testing report for the CWE? And usually it does a good job on just giving me a bunch of different suggestions that I usually would pick from there. Next up is the CVSS. This is an important one that should not be overlooked. The CVSS is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. It pretty much just provides a standardized severity score based on the potential impact and exploitability of the vulnerability. In essence, it helps prioritize the vulnerabilities remediation by categorizing its risk level. So as an example, if the risk level indicates it's a 9.9 or a 10, that means it is critical and it likely needs immediate attention. If you go here on the right side, click the button, you will be able to enter in the CVSS scores. Do not worry about the temporal score or the environmental score. Just focus on having a good understanding of the base score. In this case, the attack vector, the attack complexity, the privileges required, so forth and so on. So go through each of these and have a decent understanding of what each category is. Next up is the overview. This pretty much just describes the vulnerability and how it was identified. It should explain what the vulnerability is, why it's a concern, and how it affects the system. This section should be technical enough to provide clarity to security experts, but also clear enough that non-technical stakeholders can grasp the high-level issue. Moving on, the impact section should highlight the potential consequences if the vulnerability were to be exploited. It describes what an attacker can achieve through this vulnerability, such as unauthorized access or data exposure or control over internal systems. This section should be clear about the risks posed to the business, users, or sensitive data. Next up is the recommendation section. This section gives clear, actionable steps to fix the vulnerabilities that you found during the testing. This part is designed for the developers or IT teams in helping them address the root cause and to reduce risks effectively. Recommendations here might include changing configurations or updating policies or adjusting code. It pretty much is all aimed at making sure that these weaknesses can't be easily exploited again. Overall, the recommendation section helps translate the security issues into practical real-world actions that boost the organization's defenses. Last but not least, the details section. This is the most important section out of all the other sections in my mind. In this section, we go step by step into each of the vulnerabilities that we found. This is where we see the exact methods used to discover the issue, like the specific commands, the requests, or the code snippets. And we also include any screenshot or logs to back up our findings. This section is all about showing the security team exactly how the vulnerability works so that they can recreate it and understand the impact of it. Think of it as like a how-to for understanding and fixing the problem. All right, since we know all that new information, let's go ahead and begin starting the first draft of the report for the editorial so that we can piece it all together and go from there. All right, now in the first draft of the report, for the sake of this video, so that it doesn't take forever, I've already went in and filled out every section of the report and made it ready to review. So it went from in progress, taking it from my notes and putting it into the first draft, to being now ready for review with all the sections complete. So from this point on, what we're essentially doing is we're going to go through this report and review it and make sure that I didn't mess up anywhere, that the developer isn't going to have any issues going through the commands and making sure if he can copy and paste and it actually does in fact work, the vulnerability does exist. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I entered in my name, I entered in all these fields, and we can go down each one. I entered in the creator, the machine creator's name and email address for the sake of this. And then in the executive summary, I didn't add anything. The only thing I changed, like I mentioned before, was adding the editorial IP address, and then I added it here being the main site and having it as unauthenticated. So scrolling down, we'll come back to this part. This is the summary and findings recommendations. This is essentially just all of it being compiled into one. So we'll come back after we finish up all the findings to finish that up. So next up, the web application. I didn't really change anything here. Let's go into the appendix. I've added the appendix. I actually re-added it back after deleting it because I figured it'd be good for you guys to see. So we have the flag, the IP address, so forth and so on, and then the method that we use to get those flags. So let's go ahead and go into the actual findings now and check out each one. So the way I'm going to go through it is from just kind of how the notes are with the walkthrough. So we first start off with our Nmap scan. So title being SSH and Nginx service misconfigurations. The CWE being information exposure. The target system is running OpenSSH on port 22, Nginx on port 80, and while both services are up to date, there are configuration concerns that could lead to security vulnerabilities. Let's go ahead and switch that to make it look nice. All right, the SSH service may be susceptible to weak authentication practices. The Nginx web server is configured to reveal supported HTTP methods, the get, the head, the post, the options, which may expose unnecessary information, enable attackers to identify potential attack vectors. Additionally, a misconfiguration in Nginx leads to a failed redirect, suggesting improper routing rules. So the CVS is a medium of 6.5. Let's go in and check what I picked. So I picked a network for the attacked vector, and you can hover over these and see exactly what they mentioned. Attack complexity, very low, none, unchanged, low, none. There isn't really too much on this actual severity of this, but it is an information disclosure in my mind. Other people may say otherwise, but anyways, moving on. Weak configuration. This is for the impact. Weak configurations in SSH can enable unauthorized access if credentials are compromised. The exposure of supported HTTP methods may provide information to attackers about the system's request handling capabilities, potentially leading to method-based attacks. Additionally, misconfigurations in engine service may result in information exposure, potentially phishing attacks or exploitation of routing and method handling errors, posing a risk to the confidentiality and integrity of the system. So here is the affected components, the OpenSSH. These are pretty up to date, but let's go ahead and add those in so they know what the scan was all about. And then for the remediation, we have SSH hardening, implement key-based authentication, and disable password authentication. It's a possibility to restrict SSH access to trusted IP addresses. Another way of hardening. Regular audit SSH configuration and authorized keys to ensure only necessary access. That's a possibility. Nginx configuration. Next, limit support HTTP methods to only those required, typically get and post. Okay, because there was an option one showing up in our nmap. Review and correct engine redirect rules to ensure proper routing. Implement HTTP secure data in transit. Keep Nginx updated and monitor for known vulnerabilities. Here you can add references. I didn't add any, but let's go into the nitty-gritty details of the first report findings. So this is just very simple nmap scan, right? So here is the nmap scan, and I've noticed that I already made a mistake. So if a developer was looking at this report and he was like, I don't know what nmap is, or I want to make an nmap scan, and he goes in, and this is not the markdown version, this is the actual reporting version of it. If he wants to go in and make a copy of this, he's going to copy all of it, right? Unless he wants to be very specific, but why give the developers the headache? So let's go in and fix this up. We're going to remove this because the developers or the security team, they don't need to know that Callie at Neil Springs and HackTheBox Editorial is making an nmap scan of this. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm just going to leave it like that. So it will show up nice and clean for the developer. So he'll know, he'll be reading command used. Okay, I can copy this, throw this into the terminal and run it. So here is the output. So I'm going to go ahead and actually clean this up as well and just keep it like that. So now we have the output being very clean. There's the command used. Here is the output that we mentioned above. The 22 TCP is open for SSH, the 80 TCP open for Nginx. And here's the HTTP methods that it's showing us, the get, head, post options method for the Linux kernel with a did not follow redirect to the editorial at HackTheBox. So that is done. I made the improvement, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that. All right, the next finding, probably the most important one, the server-side request forgery and sensitive data exposure via file upload. So let's dive into this and see what needs fixing. What did I do wrong? Am I missing anything? And so forth and so on. So there is the title, very concise, very straight to the point. And I can simply just copy this title, go into ChatGPT, throw it in there, and it comes back with some suggestions, and that's exactly what I picked for this report. So that's what I put there. Now going into the CVSS is a little bit daunting for new pen testers. It was for me when I was doing the CBBH and I didn't know about the reporting CVS part, and I was reading through trying to figure it out. So it's probably a good thing that you do this ahead of time before you start doing your exams or your initial pen testing. So like I mentioned before, super important to understand what the base score is, what each of these sections indicate, but we are going to go through it really quickly right now. So bear with me while I speed through this and talk you to death. So attack vector, I picked the network. A vulnerability exploitable with the network access means the vulnerable component is bound to the network stack, and the attacker's path is through the OSI layer 3, the network layer, such that a vulnerability is often termed remotely exploitable, and that can be thought of as an attack being exploitable one or more network hops away. That's what I picked for this one. For the attack complexity, I picked low. Low indicates specialized access conditions or extenuating circumstances do not exist. An attacker can expect repeatable success against the vulnerable component. For privilege required, I picked none. The attacker is unauthorized prior to the attack, and therefore does not require any access to settings or files to carry out an attack. For user interaction, I picked none. The vulnerable system can be exploited without any interaction from any user. For scope, I did changed. An exploitable vulnerability can affect resources beyond the authorization privileges intended by the vulnerable component. In this case, the vulnerable component and the impacted component are different. For confidentiality, there's a total loss of confidentiality resulting in all resources within the impacted component being divulged to the attacker. Alternatively, access to only some restricted information is obtained, but the disclosed information presents a direct serious impact. For integrity, I did low. Modification of data is possible, but the attacker does not have control over the consequence of the modification, or the amount of modification is constrained. The data modification does have a direct serious impact on the impacted component. And for the availability, I picked a low. There's a reduced performance or interruptions in resources available. Moving on with the temporal, I didn't do anything for temporal and environmental score. So that was what I chose. I could be right, I could be wrong. There may be a lot of different variations that some people may think otherwise, so on and so on. That's what I picked, 9.9. So moving on with that, going into the overview. A server request forgery SSRF vulnerability was identified in the file upload functionality of the application. The vulnerability occurs due to improper validation of the user supplied URLs in the book URL parameter. Attackers can exploit this to interact with internal services and retrieve sensitive data, including user credentials, through the exposed API endpoints. Moving on. For the impact, the vulnerability allows attackers to perform internal port scans, discovering open services and endpoints on the server. Access internal APIs to retrieve sensitive information such as credentials for internal users, and leverage the exposed credentials to gain unauthorized access to the system, potentially compromising the entire application. And here for affected components, I did the API endpoint for the upload cover. And then for parameters, I did the book file and the book URL user input. And then for the internal services accessible via the HTTP request, since we were curling it. So for the recommendation, this is the remediation part of it, the import validation. We could strictly validate and sanitize user supplied URLs in the book URL parameter to ensure that they only point to trusted external resources. We can also whitelist URLs, restrict the file upload to only accept URLs from the trusted domains. You could use URL parsing libraries, implement URL parsing libraries to validate and sanitize input, blocking attempts to access internal IPs, such as the localhost or the 127.0.0.1, etc. Internal network segmentation. Ensure internal services are not accessible via the public-facing web application by properly segmenting the network. For credential storage, do not expose sensitive data such as plain text passwords through the API. Use secure vaults to manage the credentials. And then I added a quick reference for the OWASP SSRF prevention cheat sheet. All right, so now getting into the actual details of it, this is the most important part. This is where the security team and the developer will be spending most of their time trying to read the report and figure out how do they replicate what you just did so that they can do it themselves in order for them to be able to triage it. So let's go through this now. So again, on the left side is the markdown version of this tool, and on the right side is the output of it. So we're going to be jumping back and forth a little bit, or maybe I'll be switching from side view to full view and so forth and so on. So let's take a look. We're actually going to let's go nice view first, and then we'll go from there. So here's the picture, identifying the vulnerability. The application's file upload functionality accepts both a file and a URL, and analyzing the JavaScript that handles the upload shows a post request is sent to the URL. Okay, so this is, again, this is like information disclosure. This is just letting us know where our attack vector is, but in essence, it's not too big of a deal in their mind. So confirming SSRF using an external listener. Okay. So to verify the vulnerability, a crafted request was sent with a book URL parameter pointing to an external IP controlled by the attacker. A netcat listener was used to confirm the request was being made. So touch grass, create an empty file named grass. Okay. And here that they see there's the commands are easy to copy. So you notice that there is no neospring in Kali or Kali at Kali or any of that. The commands are very clean for them to be able to copy. So that's nice. So let's go ahead and just verify this. So we're going to copy it, and they're probably going to copy this and see, okay, attacker IP, this is where I need to put my IP address. And from there, they'll look and say, okay, I need to run netcat on 80 and put my IP address on there. Now, here's the thing that some people may otherwise forget is if they do netcat at 1234, which I've done in the past, you know, and you forget to put in the attacker IP address 1234 as well, that's why we're going through the report to verify these things. So it's important to understand that and distinguish those going forward. And it's a very easy thing to overlook. And that's why we do a first draft and then we go through and we verify that all the commands are working. So in here, we'll go netcat, we'll run on 80. And then here we'll do, we'll paste that, and it looks like they confirmed it. So that's awesome. So the other thing is, and we made sure to add in the touch grass because maybe we overlook that simple thing by adding touch grass. And instead of, you know, when they go try curling this, like let's say they're going into their terminal and they're putting in their IP address, like we did, and now they're like, there's no vulnerability, Chris. What's going on? So that's why we're going through it. So if we add the touch grass, now we can have it and they can go back in and send that request and see if that works, if that it does in fact work, which it did. It came back with exactly what the report is showing. So we verified those commands are working. We went through those steps and we're going to continue on from there. So here's the output from netcat. Again, like we are not having the Kali at Kali information on there. They don't need to know what folders we're in or any of our information. We just want it nice and clean and simple. So moving on, the user agent header Python request 2.251 revealed that the server was making requests with Python's request library, commonly used in automation scripts. This further confirms that our crafted book URL was processed by the server, allowing for server-side requests for retesting. So now getting into the foothold, scanning internal services via the SSRF. A request was then crafted to scan the internal resources by providing URLs with local host IP and various port numbers. So here is another very simple, clean outputted that they can copy and paste and throw that into the terminal and see, oh, it works. So they're getting back the exact same response. So moving forward, to automate this, a bash script was created to scan ports from 1 to 10,000. So now they have another thing that they can copy and paste and make a bash script. Maybe I would actually add in, let's go here. So port scan.sh. So they see, okay, there's a port scan.sh and here's the port. Here's the code for the bash script, right? So if they copy this, and let's go ahead and just play around with this. Let's say, okay, nano port scan, right? Oops, nano port scan.sh. Let's do exec. And they go and they save it. And it looks all fine. Okay. And now what do they need to do? They need to run it, right? But if they run it, there's no permission. So we need to go back into here and make sure that we do add that in. So and then we could chmod. Okay, and now if we wanted to run it, now it works. So these little things, they add up. So making sure that the developer knows, okay, yes, maybe they do know that they need to chmod it, but just in case, let's not give them extra mental work. You know, they may have a long day. Let's add that into it. So we've added that. Go back into making it nice and pretty. And where was I? Okay, so port scan and chmod. So we've added some instructions there. Hopefully they pick that up. They know, okay, the script resulted in a flood of similar responses. So there is the responses. Updating the bash script to filter out that response. So here's the updated bash script that they can copy and paste. Detecting an open port on the script revealed that the port. Okay, so there is that port 5000 that's being exposed. Indicating the presence of a service, sure. Accessing sensitive information via the internal API. Upon further investigation, it was found that port 5000 exposed a JSON-based API that returns sensitive metadata. A post request that was crafted to query the API due to frequent obfuscation or evasion script. So here is the curl command for the port 5000. The server responded with a file. Okay. A file. Here is the file. Let's actually make an update to that, to the file. Okay. There is the file. So the server responded with a file. The server responded with an obfuscated JSON file. All right. Now let's go back into the pretty look. So the server responded with an obfuscated JSON file. Okay. Upon retrieving this file, the following API was exposed. So here is a curl command for that. So let's figure this out. So we're curling this, and we see another mistake here that I made. I'm adding in the Kali on Linux. So let's go back in there and remove that. So I'm going to remove this. Okay. So we're curling this. So they're going to copy in that. And let's clean that. And they're going to paste that in there. And then they're going to do it like this, right? So it works. So those commands work, but we do need to be a little bit more specific in our mentioning that. So we could do a step 1 and then a step 2. And then here we do a result. So that looks good. Okay. So now they know that they're going to curl it, and then upon retrieving the file, the following API was exposed. Okay, so they're going to see, so it makes sense. So step 1, they're curling it. Here's the output. And then from the output, they're curling it. They're going to see it's the same files, and we're just JQing it, and there's the result. So there's information exposure there. So that's one thing. Moving on into the extracting credentials. Now, before I get into the extracting credentials, I did notice that when I was going through the machine, we went into the coupons and we found 2 coupons there. So that's information disclosure for coupons, and that would probably be its own report finding, because maybe one of those coupons was 100% off, or whatever the case is. That should be a very important note for the developers and the company to know. So, and we can go and test all these out too and find more information on those. And then those would also be separate important findings. But in this case, this is just the SSRF that is going to get us access to the credentials. So extracting credentials, further requests to the internal API expose sensitive credentials for the user dev by sending a request to the author's endpoint. Here's the author's endpoint. So they're going to copy this and they're going to clear this and they're going to paste it, and they're going to see, okay, it comes back with this output. So do they need to curl it? They need to curl it. And they need to paste it in. So there is the confirmation for the credentials. There's dev and there's the dev password. So we do need to make sure that we indicate that they need to, after getting this result. So we need to add some more information here. All right, so we've added a few things. Let's just confirm. Let's go through it again. So they're gonna curl this and they're gonna get this response. So let's go in and add that response there, and then from there we're going to curl, put that in there. Okay, so that's matching. So they know taking the server response and curling the editorial.htb for the credential disclosure. So here is the command for that now. So they're going to copy that and see if that works. In this case, we were not quick on that. So I think it might be actually relevant. Let's do this. Okay, so that works. So let's also do a flame shot. We're going to take a picture of that because once, you know, it does help us. And there is the disclosure. Okay, so boom, boom, the results. Right under the results, we can add in our screenshot. Okay, so let's also mention the fact that there is some evasion script. So in case they're not quick enough. Okay, so we've added evasion script timer so they understand that doing this curl command, getting this file and curling it, there may be a race condition. So we can even add that. If I can write. And then going forward. Okay, so let's take a look at how that looks nicely. So let's scroll here. Okay, so they're going to be extracting the credentials. So they're gonna, all right, the author's endpoint request for the obfuscated has an evasion script timer race condition. Okay, so we're gonna curl that. They know that. There's the output. The server responded with an obfuscated JSON file, taking the server's response and curling the editorial.htb for credentials disclosure. So we're curling the same file, we're making sure that's all accurate, and then there is the result that we can copy and paste the password if we need to, as well as a picture that we use to flame shot with. So there is actual picture documentation of us curling that endpoint and getting the credentials. It may have been beneficial to add in the first command in the picture, but it is what it is. So moving on, taking that credentials. So let's go ahead and copy that and then verify SSH dev, put in the password, and then we got verification that the password that we actually put in the results is that the actual password that we need to get access to it now. So from there we can add in the capture the flag picture with our IP address if we need to. Okay, so that looks all good. So that's done. Let's go ahead and mark that finished and we'll move on from there. All right, so we confirmed SSRF through the file upload and through the API endpoint that we were able to get the credentials that way. Now we're working on the next finding, which is lateral movement via the exposed Git repository and hard-coded credentials. So let's go into that. And again, yeah, I just pretty much copy the title, throw that into ChatGPT and say, as a pen testing report for the CWE category, what would you recommend? And then I make my choices based on that information. So from there, let's go into the overview. So here is the overview for the lateral movement exposure of the Git repository and hard-coded credentials. A Git directory was found within the apps folder, indicating the presence of a version-controlled project. By enumerating the Git repository, sensitive information was uncovered, including hard-coded credentials for the prod user. These credentials allowed lateral movement within the system. This vulnerability was found in the commit history where the production credentials were mistakenly included before a downgrade to the development environment. Oh no! An attacker with access to the repository can retrieve historical data, including credentials and configuration files. These credentials allow unauthorized access to sensitive areas of the system. Full access to the production services and the system is possible through these credentials, compromising the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the application. All right, moving on into the recommendations. The remove hard-coded credentials, avoid hard-coding sensitive credentials in source code. Use secure storage mechanisms such as environmental variables or secret management services. You could also audit the Git history and ensure sensitive data has not been committed to version control repositories. Use tools like Git secrets to automatically scan for secrets before committing. Access control. Immediately change all hard-coded credentials and ensure that the passwords are rotated periodically. Limit access to Git repositories. Ensure that the Git directories are not publicly accessible on production servers and restrict access to the Git repository to authorized users only. So moving now into the nitty-gritty, the details section of this. So finding the Git repository. After gaining access to the target system under the dev account, so let's go ahead and make this a little bit prettier. Right. Account enumeration of all the apps directory revealed the presence of the Git directory. So there's the Git directory, and then here's the bash code. Okay, so cd apps lsa, and it shows us the Git. So that is awesome. This indicated that the project files were tracked using Git enumeration, Git status. Using Git status, we're able to see several files were deleted but not yet committed. So awesome. So let's go in here and let's clear it. Git status. So we should actually probably get into the apps. Okay, Git status. So there is that. So we got the app API app py being deleted and a lot of other things being deleted too. So there are those. Okay. Inspecting Git commit history. Using the git log command, we could view the commit history. A commit title downgraded prod to dev was a particular interest to us. So let us do that. We'll do git log. And then we could also do git log for the API. So what was that? Git log downgrading. So here is the commit. We'll go quit out of that git log. And we'll do that. So Let's see, git log. Oh, what did I do wrong? I did git log. It should be git show that commit. Okay. And there we go. So we got that. So git log shows us a bunch of different things. The thing that we noticed was the downgrading prod to dev. And then using the git show command, we explored the changes in the specific commit. The commit included modifications to that pie, revealing changes from production to development and the credentials. There is that credential, so just copying that to verify that the developer, if he was in as dev, will be able to get access to that information. And from here, we might as well just go ahead and load up Flameshot, and we can just let's see, we can just copy this as well. So let's go all the way. How's that look? Does that look good? And then we'll just highlight this git command. And then if I could actually see, we'll highlight the password right there. And then we'll also highlight, where's the other password? If I can see behind this mic, man. All right. And then there we go. So we'll copy that. So we did the git show, right? The git show B734. And it shows us this, and we pasted that for compatibility, and then we'll throw in our image right under there. So, okay, so that looks good. In the diff, we found the hard-coded credentials from prod and server. So there are the hard-coded credentials that we can copy and paste now. So if we need to, let's copy this. Using the discovered production credentials discovered in the git commit, we could authenticate as prod or dev. So let's see, we're already dev. Yeah, so it looks like we need to go into prod. So we'll copy prod and then suprod, and then paste in our password. It works. So this gains access to the prod user, allowing further lateral movement within the system. So the presence of hard-coded credentials in the Git repository allowed an attacker to pivot from the dev user. We're gonna highlight that into the prod user, so it's a little bit easier to read. And then gaining access to the potential more sensitive services. The vulnerability stems from poor security practices, such as committing sensitive information to a version control system. Immediate remediation steps must include the removal of these credentials and implementing proper secrets management strategies. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at it, how it looks nicely. Output it. Okay, so boom, boom. There are the git status command. There's the git log command. Very easy to copy. It's indicating the git commit. There's the git commit that if the developer wanted to copy and paste, he can copy and paste it. It will show this output, but just in case, we threw that in there, as well as a picture. And then we also indicated that there are prod and dev hard-coded passwords and laid it out to them. So with that, that's all done. Let's go ahead and finish that and move on to the next one. Privilege escalation via GitPython RCE with a CVE number. And again, copied the title, threw that in ChatGPT, and it gave me improper control of generation of code injection. So CWE 94. And from there, here is the CVS score that I picked for attack vector. I did local, the vulnerability exploitable with local access, attack complexity low, privileges required. I picked low. The attacker is authorized with privileges that provide basic user capabilities that normally only affect settings and files of users. What's the option for that? Okay, user interaction none, scope changed, high, so forth and so on. All right, so all right, moving into the overview. Prod user has escalated privileges, allowing it to execute the Python script. And here is that Python script with sudo. This script uses the GitPython library, specifically the repo clone from method to clone remote repositories. The GitPython library version 3.129 installed on the server is vulnerable to the CVE from 2022, which allows for remote code execution due to insufficient input validation when handling URLs. By exploiting this vulnerability, an attacker can gain root level privileges and execute arbitrary code. Oh no, so that's really bad. That's a good overview right there. Going into the impact, exploit results in full root level compromise of the target system. The attacker can execute arbitrary commands with root privileges leading to complete control of the system. This compromise can result in a loss of system integrity, data theft, service disruption, or persistence on the system. And then the affected components here are the ones that we did the sudo l on. So here's the file, the Python file. Here's the package that we did the pip3 on to discover the Python 3.129. And here is the RCVE that we were able to Google and find for the GitPython library through the sneak. So we have that on there for the affected. The developers or security team can go through and just overview that and make sure that that all lines up. Going into the remediation, the recommendation, the update GitPython update or upgrade Python to a version patched against the CVE. That's probably the smartest thing to do. Restrict sudo access, limit the prod user's sudo privileges to prevent unnecessary action to scripts that can run with elevated privileges. Actually do proper input validation, so ensure that all input, especially the URLs passed to the clone from function, is properly sanitized and validated to prevent code injection vulnerabilities. Monitor and log, that's kind of a basic that everybody wants to say. Reduce privilege execution, avoid giving users the ability to run potentially dangerous scripts, especially those that deal with external inputs as root, considering using alternatives such as sudo rules with non-root users for specific tasks. And for the references, I didn't add any references, but let's get into the details section of it now, the nitty-gritty part. So we're enumerating sudo permissions. So the developer is going to read this and try to follow along and see if we are able to actually get them successfully to root. So they see here sudo l. Okay, sudo l as a prod user, and it shows that, okay, we could sudo using the Python for the script. And there is a little mistake there that I caught. There is an input field there. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so passing our input field, the user shows that the prod user can run the Python script as a root user. Analyzing the Python script, we inspected the Python script for the vulnerabilities. So we catted it. They can also go in and cat it. So let's go ahead and make sure that we can do that. Okay, so that works out and it gives us the exact same thing. So there's the output. We can actually even go in and just put output. Okay. All right, and then moving on. So the script uses the GitPython library, the repo clone method, to clone a repository from the URL to clone parameter provided by the user. However, no input validation is performed on the URL. Identifying the vulnerability. Upon checking the install Python packages, we discovered that the vulnerable version of GitPython 3.129 was in use. And the way we did that was a pip3 list, pip3 that they can run, and then they can find that there is in fact a GitPython 3.12 showing up. Now we can show them that the version of GitPython is affected by, and we added the URL, and we can go ahead and open this up, which allows the remote code execution via the clone from function when handling untrusted input, or in other words, unsanitized input. So here is the nist.gov. Thank you, nist.gov. There is more information for the security team or developer to look into, figure out, oh, okay, We need to look into it. Oh, there is the RCE for that. We messed up. We need to update that. So let's go back in and see. We added some screenshots for the proof of concept through Sneak, but we also left them a little trail to follow if they are ever confused about that. Okay, moving on now. Crafting the exploit. We created a malicious payload that would execute a reverse shell when passed as a URL to the clone form function. So let's go ahead and go in and we'll echo that in, but we do need to make sure that we did add the attacker IP in there. So let's not forget to enter in our IP address. And before we actually run that, let's clear this. And we'll run netcat1234. Do we mention netcat? Yes, right under it, we did mention it. So start in the netcat listener. We set up a netcat listener on our attacker machine to catch the reverse shell. So here we go. We echo in the temp shell. So going back into our prod at elevator, at editorial, sorry. Let's see, we're echoing in to the temp port. So now we can actually just cat it and see if we verified it. Okay, so that command works. So they're able to copy and paste that. It's going to work. They're going to start up netcat, and now they're going to try to exploit this vulnerability by leveraging the vulnerability Python script to pass the malicious URL to the clone form method, which executed the reverse shell. So here is the command that they're gonna copy and paste to verify that. So they're gonna run that and they're gonna say, oh no, there's something wrong with it. What's going on? So let's go and troubleshoot this. So we messed up somewhere. So we need to figure out why isn't this working. So let's go back here and let's scroll up. Okay, so it looks like we added some extra information that we shouldn't have. So I think it was this part, and it was. So whoops, we messed up our command, and now the dev is like, there's no exploit, you know. So, but in fact, we did correct it. We found it early, and it looks like we were able to get root access. So that is awesome. So just confirming our commands. Very good, very good. So let's go ahead and go into the markdown version, and we're going to remove this. Okay. So that is the command we just copied, and we verified that. Okay, so gaining root access. So here is the root access, and I see another mistake I made. There is no reason. Let's see here. There is no reason to have this part in there. They just need to see that there is root access. Okay, so listening, gaining root access, there's a connection, and then we did an ID and we showed the IDs for root. And from here, we can capture the flag. So I've added a screenshot of the flag. This is what I like doing. This is what I did for my other write-ups for the retired machines, but going forward, yeah. So there is the root flag, and to end it all off, the vulnerability Python library version allowed privilege escalation root via the root code execution RCE exploit. This highlights the critical need for validating user input, especially in scripts that operate with elevated privileges. Patching the GitPython library and implementing strict input validation can prevent such attacks. Now, that is all of it. So it looks like that was pretty nice. I finished that up, and that is all of it. So from there, just start finishing it all up. Maybe do a publish. Let's go ahead and do a publish, and let's take a look at how it looks like with it being published and seeing it nicely rendered through the HackTheBox's output. All right, so here we go. HackTheBox. So there's the engagement contacts, the creator's name, title. There's my name, assessors. There's executive summary. That's just the boilerplate from HackTheBox. The scope, the in-scope assets. All right, the summary and recommendations. Here is the last part. So the last part is just me highlighting pretty much all the findings in one little shareholder report for them. So server-side request forgery and sensitive data exposure via file upload. Privilege escalation via GitPython RCE with the CVE. Lateral movement via Git exposed Git repository and hard-coded credentials. SSH and Nginx service misconfigurations. So, and here's the web application assessment, 1 critical, 2 high, 1 medium. This may vary, I don't know. Let's go through. Here are the technical findings. So this is what they're gonna see. They're gonna see a CWE, they're gonna see a critical, a 9.9, and then they're gonna read the root cause, the impact, the affected components, the remediation, and the references. And then they're gonna go into the actual finding the evidence and running exactly through the same thing that we ran through. So hopefully that all makes sense. I know I sped through this a lot. My voice is a little bit sore now. I apologize, but that is essentially everything for this fun little short editorial box. Now, if you're doing the CBBH or the CPTS, obviously it's going to be a lot longer. You have 7 days, and it's a lot of fun. All right, well, that's it for this video. I really enjoyed the editorial. It was a fun box to hit, and it was a really fun one to write out. I learned a lot through the process. I really enjoyed it. And if you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, let me know. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe. And if you have any questions, or if I should have added anything or missed anything, let me know in the comment section below. But that is pretty much it. I'll see you in the next video.